They didn't see a builder. They didn't see a visionary. They didn't even ask for his name. They just saw a hoodie and assumed he didn't belong. But they didn't know they were standing on his legacy. He helped build the foundation of one of the most luxurious hotels in New York City. He brought vision, partnership, sweat, and soul into brick and marble. Then they buried him, not in dirt, but in silence. They said the deal fell through. They said his name got lost in the paperwork. But what they really meant was, you don't fit the brand. 30 years passed. The city forgot his name, but he didn't. And one rainy afternoon, he came back, not with a lawsuit, not with a microphone, not with revenge, but with a sack full of proof, a worn hoodie, and a quiet fire that refused to go out. He walked into the same hotel that erased him, sat down on the same floor they dragged him across, and let the truth do what truth always does: rise. What started as one black man sitting in silence became a movement of architects, artists, activists, students, mothers, janitors, and kids with bricks in their backpacks. A hoodie that once meant threat now meant truth. This isn't just a story about injustice. This is about what happens when the story you tried to bury learns how to build itself back, louder, stronger, and in every corner of the city you said it didn't belong. The rain that night wasn't gentle. It came sideways, fierce, like the city itself was angry. Water slammed against the wide glass doors of the Avalon Hotel, streaking down in thick sheets, turning the sidewalk into a mirror of blurred headlights and forgotten promises. Inside, however, the world was untouched. Warm light bounced off crystal chandeliers. Voices murmured over clinking glasses, and money whispered through every detail. Silk scarves, patent leather shoes, champagne chilled just enough to match the temperature of pride. And then the door opened. Wind howled in like a warning. Rain sprayed across the polished marble floor. And in the middle of it all stood a tall black man wearing a soaked gray hoodie and boots that had seen more pavement than comfort. He carried a battered burlap sack over one shoulder. The security guard at the door, instinct trained by habit and unspoken codes, stepped forward almost before the water had finished dripping from the man's hood. "Sir," he said, his tone practiced but cold, "this is a private property. You need to—" "I know where I am," the man said. His voice was calm, too calm, "and I'm not lost." His name was Malcolm Reed. No one inside the Avalon knew that. To them, he was just another figure from the forgotten parts of the city, another shadow in a hoodie. But Malcolm didn't care who they thought he was. He wasn't there for attention. He was there for the truth. Across the lobby, the front desk buzzed with efficiency. Guests were being checked into $900 suites with Egyptian cotton sheets and skyline views. The concierge was arranging last-minute helicopter rides to the Hamptons. And behind the front desk, Camilla Soto, 26, in her navy blue blazer and name tag that always sat a little crooked, noticed the shift. The energy changed the moment Malcolm stepped through those doors. You didn't need to hear the wind or see the puddles forming under his boots to know it. Everyone could feel it. Conversations stalled, eyes lifted, brows furrowed. Because in a place like the Avalon, everything was designed to keep people like Malcolm out. Not with signs, not with rules, but with presence, with marble and crystal and uniforms that said, "You don't belong." Camilla watched as Philip Darden, the general manager, emerged from his glass-walled office, phone still in hand, annoyed that his evening wine and stock reports had been interrupted. Philip was a man who believed in surfaces, tailored suits, perfect smiles, and hard edges hidden behind Southern charm. He looked at Malcolm the same way he looked at the cleaning crew, like they were necessary but inconvenient. "Is there a problem here?" Philip asked, not waiting for the answer. "We have a gala tonight. This isn't the shelter." Malcolm turned toward him. His hood was still up, casting a shadow over his face, but his voice came through sharp and deliberate. "No problem," he said. Just here to claim what's mine." Camilla froze. A guest nearby actually laughed. A man in a tuxedo whispered, "What the hell is this?" And his wife clutched her purse a little tighter. Philip chuckled, loudly for effect. "You're here to claim the Avalon," he said, drawing out the last word like it was a punchline. Malcolm nodded once. Philip tilted his head. "Sir, usually when someone wanders in asking for change, they don't ask for the whole damn building." "I didn't ask," Malcolm replied, reaching into the burlap sack. The security guard, Burke, moved instantly, hand to his holster. Malcolm paused. "It's not a weapon," he said softly. "It's paper. Just paper." He pulled out a folded, worn document, edges yellowed, creased 100 times over. He handed it toward Philip. Philip took it without care, barely glancing at it before scoffing. "This some kind of joke?" he said. "This is a land deed." "So what?" Camilla leaned forward slightly behind the desk, trying to catch a glimpse. "That deed," Malcolm said, "is from 1974. It lists the land this hotel was built on. And my name's on it. Malcolm Reed. Not that you'd recognize it, of course." Philip laughed again, this time louder. Guests started joining in, chuckling into their glasses. It was a ridiculous idea, after all. A homeless black man in a hoodie claiming to own the most luxurious hotel on the block. "You people are unbelievable," Philip muttered under his breath. "Every damn week, it's something new." He waved to Burke. "Get him out of here. Gently, if possible." Burke grabbed Malcolm's arm. The old man didn't resist. But before he was dragged away, he said one thing. "You can throw me out. You can laugh. But facts don't vanish just because you're uncomfortable." And then, as Burke shoved him back into the rain, Malcolm looked up at the gilded sign above the door and said, "You built your house on someone else's foundation. Someday it's gonna crack." Outside, the rain came down harder, as if the sky itself were furious. Malcolm Reed stood on the hotel steps, his hoodie clinging to him like a second skin, soaked and sagging under the weight of water and time. He bent down slowly, picked up his burlap sack, now wet and sagging, and slung it over his shoulder with the same care a man might give an old friend. No one offered him help. No one asked if he was okay. The doorman shut the door behind him like sealing off a threat. Back inside, life snapped back into place. Philip Darden adjusted his cufflinks and disappeared back into his office, muttering about lunatics. Guests laughed nervously, sipping their drinks, eager to let the moment pass like a bad smell. A few whispered to each other, some amused, some uneasy, but none of them questioned what they had just seen, except one. Camilla Soto didn't move from the front desk. Her eyes stayed locked on the water still pooling on the lobby floor. In her hand was the hotel's laminated customer service standard sheet, but she hadn't turned a page in minutes. Something about that man, his stillness, his certainty, refused to leave her. Across the lobby, Jordan Price, a bellhop in his early 20s, stood beside the luggage cart near the elevator bank. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't smiled. He had watched Malcolm Reed the same way he watched thunderstorms on the rooftop of his apartment building in Harlem, knowing there was more power behind the quiet than most people understood. He looked toward Camilla. Their eyes met. Both said nothing, but both were thinking the same thing. That man wasn't crazy. By the time Camilla's shift ended at 10:30, the rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and shimmering. She rode the 6 train downtown, headphones in, but her thoughts weren't on music. She replayed the scene again and again in her mind. The document, the name, the look in Malcolm's eyes when he said, "You built your house on someone else's foundation." She couldn't sleep. Instead, she opened her laptop, logged into the employee portal, and searched the internal property archives. Nothing came up. Access denied. Too old. Not digitized. Frustrated, she opened Google, typed in Malcolm Reed land ownership, New York 1974, and hit enter. It was a long shot, but something pinged. A single article. The New York Tribune, April 15th, 1975. Black entrepreneur invests in East Side redevelopment. Malcolm Reed to co-develop property with Darden and Sons. Her heart skipped. She zoomed in on the grainy black and white photo beneath the headline. It showed two men shaking hands in front of a sign that read, "Future site of Avalon Plaza." One of them was unmistakably younger Philip Darden. The other, a tall black man in a coat and fedora, had to be Malcolm. Camilla leaned back in her chair. It wasn't a lie, it wasn't a scam. He had been a co-owner. The next morning, Camilla didn't go straight to the reception desk. Instead, she made her way down a narrow hallway behind the staff break room to a locked room most employees ignored, the archives. The archives were where they kept the old stuff: ledgers, maintenance records, land surveys, handwritten memos from decades past. It smelled like dust and mildew. The overhead light flickered as she stepped inside. She wasn't supposed to be here, but the lock had been busted for months and nobody cared enough to fix it. She started digging. At first, it was all noise. Payroll ledgers from 1989, invoices for chandeliers, records of renovation permits. Then, tucked inside a faded blue folder labeled Property Acquisition, 1970s, she found something. A typed contract, signed in blue ink. Malcolm Reed and Darden and Sons hereby enter joint ownership of Lot 18, Parcel 42. Her hands trembled. There it was, his name, in legal ink. She pulled out her phone, snapped pictures. Then she found something else. A letter dated 1986 from the Darden firm's legal team. Addressed to Malcolm Reed. Per Clause 4 of the Silent Partner Agreement, your shares are being dissolved due to breach of operational obligations. Camilla read it twice, then a third time. There was no signature from Malcolm, no countersign, just the letter itself. Her chest tightened. They had pushed him out, legally perhaps, but quietly, without media, without fairness. The kind of silent erasure that didn't make headlines, the kind reserved for men like Malcolm, men in hoodies, men who didn't belong in champagne lobbies. She slid the papers back into the folder, heart pounding. That night, she sent the photos to Jordan. A minute later, he replied, "I knew it. This is his story." The next morning, the hotel lobby looked exactly the same. Gleaming floors, pressed uniforms, perfume and politics drifting through the air. But for Camilla Soto, everything had changed. She stood behind the front desk, smiling on autopilot, checking in guests whose names were always followed by a pause. Rockefeller, de Beaumont, Langston. Yes, those Langstons. She nodded, typed, handed out key cards. But her mind was with a man in a hoodie, standing in the rain with history in his hand. Every time the glass doors swung open, her heart skipped. Part of her expected to see him again. Malcolm Reed, soaked to the bone, eyes steady as a mountain. But he didn't return. Yet the story stayed. "Ma'am?" a guest asked, snapping her back to the present. "Can we get 2 more robes in the penthouse?" "Of course," she replied, voice like honey. "Right away." As the guest turned, Camilla caught sight of Jordan Price moving across the lobby with purpose. He didn't wear the stiff smile of service today. He looked serious. As he passed her, he slipped a folded, receipt-sized note across the counter like it was a tip. Camilla picked it up discreetly. Basement records room. 11:15. Bring the folder. They met in the cramped utility corridor that ran behind the kitchen, past crates of wine and boxes of linen. The records room was just a glorified storage closet, windowless and silent except for the occasional drip from an overhead pipe. Jordan closed the door behind them. Camilla unzipped her tote and pulled out the folder. "I don't know how long I'll have this," she whispered. "It could get flagged in the system if someone logs it missing." Jordan nodded and opened the folder. He skimmed the pages with the careful eyes of someone used to reading between the lines. When he reached the 1986 dissolution letter, his jaw clenched. They used Clause 4, he muttered. Standard silent partner, kill switch. No media, no settlement, just gone. Camilla crossed her arms. It was legal? Legal and moral ain't the same, he said. This was a black man who built something, and they erased him before the paint even dried. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Jordan pulled out his phone. I'm going to leak this. Camilla looked up startled. Jordan, I'm not stupid. I won't tag the hotel. I'll send it to a contact at Liberty Lens. Independent news. They'll verify it, protect the source. Just a little oxygen to this fire. It's his story, not ours to bury. Camilla bit her lip. And what if they come after us? Jordan looked at her. They already are. Hours later, the photos were live. An anonymous blog post on Liberty Lens titled, The Black Founder of Avalon They Never Told You About. The article featured a blurry scan of the 1975 Tribune photo, the deed, the unsigned letter, and a single caption beneath the image. This man built the foundation. They built their legacy on his silence. It didn't go viral, not yet, but it spread, quietly, among hospitality workers, among local real estate advocates, among the Black history professors at CUNY who had long whispered about the developer who disappeared. At 8:13 p.m., Camilla received a text from an unknown number. You're playing with matches near gasoline. Walk away. She stared at it. Didn't reply. 2 minutes later, Jordan messaged her. I'm being followed. Same SUV from yesterday. Just passed me twice on Lenox Ave. I'm heading home. I'll text when I'm inside, but no second text came. Camilla didn't sleep that night. At 3:27 a.m., unable to wait, she grabbed her coat, slipped the folder into a waterproof pouch, and took the 2 train to Jordan's neighborhood in Harlem. His apartment light was off. She rang 3 times. No answer. A neighbor stepped out to dump trash and muttered, Didn't see him come in? She felt the weight of the story tightening around her chest. It wasn't just a headline anymore. It was dangerous. It was buried for a reason. And now, it was waking up. The next morning, she came into work early. Philip Darden was already pacing behind the front desk, face tight. He didn't mention the blog post, didn't mention anything. But when Camilla returned from break, she noticed something under her keyboard, taped beneath the desk. A note, block letters, black marker. Some stories are better left untold. Her fingers trembled. At 10:12 a.m., a familiar figure appeared across the street. Same hoodie, same boots, same sack over the shoulder, Malcolm Reed. He didn't enter the hotel. He just stood there across the avenue, watching the Avalon, and smiling. By the end of that week, the staff at the Avalon had stopped talking about the blog posts, not because they'd forgotten it, but because silence had been ordered from the top. Emails were sent out with subject lines like rumors and employee conduct and maintaining professionalism amid distraction. Philip Darden even called a surprise staff meeting in the ballroom, reminding everyone in a voice tight with forced calm that loyalty was valued, and any violation of NDA agreements would result in immediate termination. He never mentioned Malcolm Reed by name, but everyone knew, especially Camilla Soto, who sat in the back of that meeting room, her hands balled into fists under the table, her mind flashing with images of yellowed deeds and unsigned letters. And then there was the absence. Jordan Price was gone. No word, no text, no shift changes logged, no explanation. When Camilla asked the front desk scheduler, the girl simply shrugged, called out, not our business. But it was. It was all connected. That afternoon, Camilla found herself walking through the staff hallway when she heard voices echoing from Philip's office. His voice, sharp and agitated, followed by the low, smooth baritone of someone she didn't recognize. She lingered near the half-open door just long enough to hear 2 words that made her stomach twist. Find him. Meanwhile, the city moved on. The guests kept coming. The lattes stayed perfectly foamed, and the Avalon returned to its rhythm of wealth and silence until the video. It was a Thursday morning when it happened. Finished her coffee when one of the housekeepers, Diana, a single mother who worked the 8th floor, rushed over to the desk, eyes wide, phone in hand. "Have you seen this?" she whispered, flipping her screen around. It was surveillance footage. Grainy, black and white. Timestamp from 3 days ago. Early morning. A lone figure entering the alley behind the hotel, slipping through the old freight door. Malcolm Reed. He walked in slow, cautious, like a man returning to sacred ground. He wasn't carrying anything threatening, just his hoodie, the same sack. But what made the video so jarring was how calm he looked, like he'd been there before, like he knew every inch. Camilla swallowed hard. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Diana hesitated. It was circulating in the cleaners group chat. One of the guys on security leaked it. Within hours, it had spread beyond the hotel. Twitter, Reddit, YouTube reaction videos. Homeless man trespasses luxury hotel, claims it's his. Black hoodie guy returns to scene. But why? Avalon's phantom guest, a modern ghost story. Camilla watched in horror as the story warped into spectacle. The story Malcolm had tried to reclaim was now being hijacked, turned into content, mockery, clickbait. Some people laughed in the comments. Some called him crazy. Others started digging. A Reddit thread appeared that afternoon titled #JusticeForReed with over 2,000 upvotes. One user posted, "Found old zoning records. Lot 18 was definitely co-owned. Looks like something shady went down in '86. Can anyone confirm?" Another wrote, "He's not just some crazy black guy in a hoodie. This is bigger." And just like that, the narrative began to split between those who still saw a vagrant with delusions and those who saw a stolen legacy wrapped in wet fabric and silence. By evening, the hotel was in damage control mode. Philip Darden stormed through the lobby like a man trying to outrun a rumor. PR teams were looped in. A statement was drafted and released on the Avalon's website. Recent footage circulating online is under review. The Avalon maintains the highest standards of safety and privacy for our guests. We are cooperating fully with local authorities. We do not comment on unverified claims. But the internet didn't wait for verification. That night, someone spray-painted the front sidewalk of the hotel in bold red letters. "Truth doesn't trespass." Philip had it power washed before sunrise. But by then, photos were already viral. And in the midst of it all, Malcolm Reed vanished again. No one saw him. No one heard from him. Until someone posted a picture the next day, blurry, taken from a second-story window in the Bronx. It showed Malcolm standing at a payphone, hood up, hand resting on the sack. Behind him, a closed-down law office with a faded sign. "Reed and Willow, Attorneys at Law. EST 1974. The comments lit up. Wait, was he a lawyer too? This black man's story goes deeper than we thought. Forget the hoodie, this guy built something they buried. Friday morning arrived with a tension you could taste in the air, like ozone before lightning. Camilla stood at her station behind the front desk, but her mind was everywhere else. The hotel was officially in crisis mode. Meetings behind closed doors, legal reps pacing the lobby with coffee in one hand and Bluetooth earpieces buzzing in the other. The PR firm had taken over the conference room on the second floor. Camilla could hear their voices through the vents, saying things like optics, downplay the racial angle, and we need a sympathetic counterstory, fast. It wasn't just about Malcolm Reed anymore. It was about control. It was about who got to tell the black man's story and who got paid for it. Camilla's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Alley door. 11:35. Come alone. Wear the red scarf. Her blood froze. She had almost forgotten about the red scarf, a simple thing Malcolm had pressed into her hand the night they first met, just before security dragged him out. "If you ever need to find me," he'd said, "this will get their attention." She stuffed her phone in her pocket and left the desk, muttering something to the assistant manager about checking supplies. She grabbed the scarf from her locker and tied it loosely around her neck as she slipped through the back hall and out into the alley. Rain had stopped, but the street was still wet, glittering with the sheen of puddled city grime and neon reflections. The freight door creaked open from the inside. Malcolm stood there just inside the shadow, hoodie up, sack over his shoulder. "You came," he said. "You disappeared," she shot back. "Jordan's missing. The hotel's covering everything up. And now they're spinning this like you're just another trespasser with a mental illness." Malcolm didn't react. He just looked her in the eye. "That's how they do it," he said. "First they erase your name, then your face, then your mind. If they make the story sound crazy, they never have to answer for the truth." Camilla stepped forward. "Why me? Why reach out to me?" "Because you looked," he said. "When everyone else laughed, you looked." Inside, he guided her through a narrow utility corridor, past pipes and electrical panels, to a rusted fuse box half hidden behind a steel shelf. With a soft grunt, Malcolm pushed the shelf aside. Behind it, a panel in the wall had been pried open, revealing a narrow storage crawl space. He reached in and pulled out a dusty wooden crate, the kind used to store old legal documents. His hands were slow, methodical, like performing a ritual. Inside the crate were three items: a leather-bound journal, pages brittle but intact, a black and white photograph of the original construction site, with Malcolm standing beside a young Philip Darden Sr. and a VHS tape labeled "Public Access, May 1987 Interview." Camilla stared at the contents. "You kept all this." "I didn't trust the courts," Malcolm said. "Didn't trust the banks. But I trusted the walls. Buildings remember things, especially the ones built on betrayal." He handed her the journal. "It's all in here. The partnership, the betrayal, the threats, the deal that made me vanish." Camilla opened the journal, her fingers trembling as she turned through sketches of building plans, handwritten notes about zoning approvals, and a page dated July 13th, 1986. "Today they offered me silence, money and silence. Said I was lucky to be involved at all. Said my name didn't look good on headlines. Said donors preferred something paler." She looked up at him, heart pounding. "You knew they'd erase you?" Malcolm nodded. "They already did. I just lived long enough to remember what they forgot." That evening, Camilla uploaded the scanned journal pages to an encrypted drive. She created a second copy and hid it on a flash drive tucked inside her purse. Then she logged off her personal devices and cleared her browsing history. She didn't trust anyone anymore. Even Diana, the housekeeper, had gone quiet. One day cheerful, chatty, the next pale and withdrawn. When asked about Jordan, she just shook her head. "I didn't see nothing. I don't want trouble." The message was clear. They were watching everyone now, even the staff who said nothing. By midnight, another photo surfaced online. Blurry, dim lighting, but unmistakable. Malcolm, in the basement of the Avalon, holding the journal, standing before a wall of unfiled blueprints. The caption read, "He never left. He just knew where to hide." Outside, another message had been left on the sidewalk. This one spray-painted in white. "Hoodies fade. Truth doesn't." The Avalon had never felt so quiet. Not silent. No, the lobby still buzzed with its usual orchestration of luxury. Shoes tapped across marble. Glasses clinked with aged whiskey. Elevator doors whispered open and closed with the obedience of a well-trained pet. But beneath it all, a silence vibrated, a knowing silence. People were still pretending. Pretending they hadn't read the story. pretending they hadn't seen the photos, pretending that a black man in a hoodie hadn't just walked into their world with a legacy they tried to bury and cracked the floor beneath them. Camilla walked the halls like she was floating between two worlds. She was still wearing the uniform, still checking in guests, still saying, "Welcome to the Avalon." But her eyes carried weight now. She was seeing behind things, the press statements, the cheerful staff memos. Even Philip's suddenly cool, composed demeanor. It was all just a stage. And Malcolm Reed? He'd kicked over the spotlight. That night, Philip Darden held a private dinner in the rooftop suite. It was a closed-door gathering of senior executives and a few investors who had flown in from out of state. Word had it they were containing the narrative. Camilla wasn't supposed to be there, but when the head server called out sick, she was asked to step in. Temporary promotion. The table was round. 12 people, crystal glasses, Wagyu steak, conversations held through gritted teeth and fake laughs. She moved like a ghost, pouring wine, refreshing plates, pretending not to hear a single word. But she heard everything, especially when the talk turned to the man in the hoodie. "You're telling me a homeless black man could bring down 30 years of business reputation?" One of the investors scoffed. "Come on, he's not just homeless," another corrected. "He's documented." Philip waved a hand. "It's being handled. A few letters from our legal team, some friendly conversations with the media outlets. By Monday, this will be a footnote, if anything." "And what about the girl?" the first man asked. Camilla froze. The wine bottle paused in midair. "She's harmless," Philip said. "Young, emotional. We'll move her to a different department, or let her go quietly if needed." Camilla clenched her jaw, forced her hand to stay steady, and finished pouring the wine with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When she stepped out onto the service elevator, her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from fury. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Camilla opened the journal again. She flipped to the very last entry. "I knew they'd forget me, but I hoped they wouldn't forget the work, the building, the foundation. Even if my name vanishes, the bricks will still remember." She stared at the words for a long time. Then she reached for her laptop. The next morning, a new video went live. It wasn't from a media outlet, not from Liberty Lens, not from any news site. It was from Camilla's own account. Her face was never shown. Her voice was masked. But the footage was real. Malcolm's deed, the journal, the partnership photo. The interview clip from 1987 where Malcolm warned, "If they can steal your name, they'll steal your future." The video title, "The Black Man in the Hoodie Who Built Avalon and Got Erased." Within an hour, it had 40,000 views. By nightfall, it had over 300,000. Inside the Avalon, the fallout was immediate. Phones rang nonstop. Guests canceled bookings. A protest group began organizing a silent sit-in in the lobby, wearing hoodies in solidarity. Camilla watched from behind the desk as 5 guests walked in, young, black, proud, and sat down on the velvet chairs like they belonged there. They didn't order drinks. They didn't ask for rooms. They just sat. One of them wore a hoodie that read, "This isn't just a building, it's a black story." At 6:04 p.m., Camilla received a call from an unknown number. She didn't answer. At 6:06, another call. Same number, then a voicemail. She listened. Malcolm's voice came through, deep and calm. "They know now. That's enough. But don't stop, because stories like mine, they don't end with a headline. They end with change, or they don't end at all." Then he hung up. No goodbye, just the message. Outside, the rain began again. Slow, steady, cleansing. And through the glass doors of the Avalon, Camilla saw a figure in the distance. Hoodie up, sack slung over one shoulder. He didn't look back. He just kept walking. Sunday morning should have been quiet. The kind of stillness where hotel staff yawned through slow check-ins and guests wandered down for overpriced brunch with their sunglasses still on from the night before. But the Avalon, it was anything but quiet. By 8 on the session, there were cameras. Not the discreet kind. Not tourist iPhones snapping the lobby's famous chandelier. But media crews, tripods, boom mics, anchors in expensive coats with eyes lit by scandal. Parked vans lined the curb outside. Protesters showed up again, this time in larger numbers, organized, silent, all wearing hoodies. Black hoodies, gray hoodies, red ones with bold letters. The story was built on him. We are Malcolm. Inside the hotel, it was chaos under a polished surface. Philip Darden walked the marble floor in a crisp navy suit like he still owned the world. But his jaw was tight. His eyes darted too quickly. He issued orders like a general trying to hold a fort already on fire. Contain the lobby. Block outside press. Increase security presence. Visibly. Make it look like we're not threatened. Just in control. Camilla stood at her post watching it all. Except this time, she wasn't just an observer. She was waiting. At 10:42 a.m., the elevator dinged, and the world changed. Malcolm Reed stepped out onto the lobby floor. Not sneaking, not soaking wet, not through the back freight door or the alley, through the front, wearing the same gray hoodie, the same scuffed boots, the same sack slung over his shoulder like it held the weight of history itself. But this time, he came through the main entrance, shoulder to shoulder with 3 civil rights lawyers and a city councilwoman. Every eye in the room snapped toward him. Phones rose, flashes popped. Camilla saw one guest, mid-bite into a croissant, freeze completely, mouth still open. Philip Darden was already crossing the floor. "Sir," he said through a smile full of gritted teeth, "I'm going to have to ask you." "You don't ask me anything," Malcolm interrupted. Calm, clear. His voice louder than the lobby deserved, but quieter than a shout. "This building sits on my name, on my silence, and now it's on my terms." Gasps, murmurs, 1,000 silent reactions born in a single second. Then Philip tried again. "Mr. Reed, you're making a public disturbance. You're not on the registry. You don't have a reservation." "I have a record," Malcolm cut in, "of every lie you built this place on, of every signature you forged, of every dollar you made off what was never yours." And with that, he pulled something from the sack. Not a deed this time, not a journal, but a microphone. Small, wireless, already live. From behind the crowd, a young man wearing a press badge raised a camera. He nodded at Malcolm. They were streaming. Philip's face twisted. "This is private property," he said, louder now, trying to speak over the growing hum of the room. "Private?" Malcolm said, lifting his chin. "Funny. You didn't say that when you took public funds for your renovation, or when you used my blueprint to secure the original zoning grant in '74. Camilla's heart pounded behind the desk. The room felt electrified, like the moment before a verdict. And then it came. Philip snapped. "Security!" he shouted. "Get this man out of my hotel." Burke and 2 other guards rushed in, hands ready, posture aggressive. But this time, they weren't facing a quiet old man in the rain. They were facing a symbol. They were facing the hoodie the world now watched. As Burke reached out to grab Malcolm's arm, a young protester stepped forward. Then another. Then a third. Each one silent. Each one standing between Malcolm and the guards. And then Camilla moved. She stepped out from behind the front desk, walked across the polished floor, and stood next to Malcolm. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her name tag said enough. She worked here. And now she stood with him. Philip's voice cracked. "You're all trespassing. This is criminal." The city councilwoman stepped forward, hand raised. "Actually, Mr. Darden," she said coolly, "this man has a right to speak. And if you remove him on false grounds, you'll be dealing with more than bad PR. You'll be dealing with a civil lawsuit. Multiple, in fact." Philip froze. The cameras were still rolling. The crowd was still watching. The story, his story, was no longer his to spin. It was Malcolm's. Burke didn't move. Not because he didn't want to, but because, for the first time in his long, stiff-backed security career, he wasn't sure who the threat was anymore. The crowd in the lobby had shifted. What began as a group of guessing gawkers had quietly transformed into a silent army. Journalists, protesters, staff, strangers who had once walked past Malcolm Reed without a glance now stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Most wore hoodies, some black, some gray, a few red, but all of them stood in defiance of the image Philip Darden had tried to preserve. Philip's face had turned red, not with embarrassment, but with fear masked as fury. His voice quivered, but the words still came out like commands. "I said remove him!" Still, no one moved. Not the guards, not Camilla, not Malcolm. Camilla felt it before she saw it. That moment when a place no longer belongs to the people who built it, but to the truth breaking through the walls. She could feel the story shifting in real time. And then, from the hallway to the left of the lobby, came the sound of rapid footsteps. The crowd parted. It was Diana, the housekeeper. She didn't walk. She marched. In her hands, a brown envelope, thick and trembling, slightly. Camilla's heart caught in her throat. Diana reached Malcolm and held out the envelope like it was something sacred. "I found it," she whispered. Inside was a set of internal memos, dated and stamped, from the Darden Family Trust. Copies of correspondence between Philip's father and city officials. Details of a quiet payoff, $300,000 wired through a dummy corporation to encourage Malcolm's silent exit from the original development team in 1986. It wasn't just shady, it was criminal. Malcolm took the envelope gently and handed it to the lawyer by his side, who immediately turned and passed it to the press. The camera flash was instantaneous. Philip surged forward. "That's stolen," and raised his voice once. He didn't need to. The building was speaking for him now. Every echo of his footsteps, every creak in the floorboard, every breath held by those watching the live stream. This was his courtroom. This was his vindication. From the far end of the lobby, someone clapped. One person, two, then more. Not a standing ovation, a reckoning, the sound of a lie collapsing beneath the weight of its own silence. And then Malcolm did something no one expected. He sat down, right in the center of the lobby, cross-legged, hoodie still up, sack beside him, like he had nowhere else to be, like this ground, the very marble floor he was once dragged across in humiliation, belonged to him, because it did. Camilla sat down next to him, then Diana, then a journalist, then guests. One by one, people lowered themselves onto the lobby floor, not in protest, but in recognition of a man, of a story, of a truth that refused to die quietly. Outside, the crowd pressed against the windows, watching. Inside, the lobby, once a sanctuary for the elite, had become a sanctuary for justice. Malcolm looked around slowly, taking it all in. He said only 5 words. "You hear me now, don't you?" The answer didn't come in words. It came in the silence, the kind that follows a verdict. Somewhere upstairs, the boardroom doors slammed shut. Philip was gone. No security, no lawyers, no one to stop what had already begun. Because stories, real stories, the kind that are black and quiet and wrapped in hoodies, don't end with silence. They start with it. The marble floor of the Avalon had never held so much weight, not from bodies but from history. Malcolm Reed sat cross-legged, steady as stone, while around him, a once silent world bent toward him like gravity. More people dropped to the floor, not because they were told to, but because something in them shifted. The truth, once ignored, now demanded space. It demanded presence, and so they gave it. Some sat in suits, others in uniforms. A few, like Camilla and Diana, sat with their backs straight, eyes locked on the man who'd been dragged through this very lobby like garbage just days before. But today, he sat like a king. Outside, reporters huddled under umbrellas as a soft drizzle began to fall. The cameras never blinked. Live feeds ticked upward in real time. 500K, 750K, 1 million viewers. On the hotel's official site, the front page had gone down, crashed by traffic, or maybe taken offline intentionally. Either way, the Avalon no longer controlled the narrative. The internet had already chosen its headline. Black man in hoodie returns to hotel. He helped build and takes back his story. Somewhere upstairs, the elevator dinged. A few heads turned. Most stayed focused. Down came 3 men in expensive suits. Legal, PR, probably both. The suits looked like armor, tailored, pressed, but fragile under the weight of consequence. They approached slowly, whispering amongst themselves before one stepped forward and addressed Malcolm directly. "Mr. Reed, we'd like to invite you to a private conversation to discuss these matters more professionally." Malcolm looked up at him. "I'm already having a conversation," he said, sweeping his hand around the lobby. "And it's more professional than anything you've done in 30 years. The suit shifted awkwardly. "We'd just like to resolve this peacefully." Malcolm's smile was small, but it cut deep. "I've been peaceful my whole life," he said. "You're just not used to a black man being peaceful out loud." The man backed off. Then something strange happened. A guest stood up. A woman in her 60s, white, dressed in a pearl-colored cashmere coat. She walked toward Malcolm, pulled something from her handbag, and held it out. It was a photo. "1975, she said softly. "You helped my father secure a loan to save his print shop. I was a little girl. You probably don't remember me." Malcolm's face didn't change, but his eyes softened. She placed the photo at his feet and stepped back. Another guest followed, a young black man who had been silent until now. "You spoke at my college in '89, he said. "Told us to build things they couldn't bulldoze. I never forgot." Camilla felt her throat tighten. Because this wasn't just a sit-in anymore. This was a return, a collective memory unfolding in real time. And the world, it was watching. Then the final blow came. A tall woman with gray braids stepped through the lobby doors, escorted by 2 local reporters and a small film crew. Miss Eileen Holloway, former head of the city's zoning commission, retired, revered, and carrying a sealed box labeled "Confidential, 1986 Zoning Recommendations." She didn't need a mic. Her voice carried. "I've been holding on to this for decades," she said, "because I was threatened. Because I was told my reputation wasn't worth protecting a black man with big ideas. But now, my silence costs more than my fear." She handed the box to Malcolm and turned to the cameras. He owned the land. He co-designed the building. And they erased him because it was easier than sharing the credit. That's the truth. Gasps. Some from the crowd, some from the press. Even Philip, who had just emerged from a side hallway, went pale at the sight of Eileen Holloway. The truth had a name now. A face, a witness. Malcolm slowly rose to his feet. The crowd didn't cheer. They stood with him, wordlessly, as if pulled upward by something sacred. His hoodie clung to his frame, damp at the shoulders, but no longer the symbol of otherness it had been just a week ago. Today it was a badge, not of protest, but of power. He stepped to the center of the room and looked directly into the nearest live stream camera. "I didn't come here to burn it all down," he said. "I came here to remind you who laid the bricks." A pause. "And I'm not leaving." By Monday morning, Malcolm Reed wasn't just a story. He was a problem. At least that's how the board at the Avalon now saw him. The sit-in had turned into a symbol. The headlines were no longer dismissible. "Protest turns powerful as black man in hoodie reclaims stolen legacy," one headline read. Another simply said, "He was right." But behind closed doors, Far away from the cameras and the marble floor, a much darker strategy was unfolding. Emails bounced between attorneys. Old favors were called in. And at exactly 3:47 p.m., the New York Post broke the new angle. Malcolm Reed, fraudster or forgotten visionary. The article was riddled with anonymous sources, questioning the authenticity of his documents, his mental stability, even hinting he had a criminal past. Despite no charges on record, the attacks were surgical, cold, strategic, because if they couldn't disprove the facts, they'd smear the man. Camilla sat on her lunch break reading the article on her cracked iPhone, her sandwich untouched on her lap. "They're trying to kill his story," she said aloud. Diana looked over her shoulder, frowning. "They're trying to kill him, girl." She wasn't wrong. By evening, a second article dropped, this one on a niche business watchdog site funded by hotel and real estate conglomerates. Reed never filed an architectural license in the city, it claimed. He wasn't even a real developer. No proof he ever held stake in the Avalon's ownership. The twist? None of the documents were cited, no sources confirmed, but the doubt was planted, and that was the goal. Make him look unstable, questionable, a myth built from nostalgia. Later that night, Malcolm sat in the dim-lit kitchen of a local community center in Harlem. A few volunteers cleaned up quietly around him. His hoodie was draped over the back of the chair, damp from the rain. He stared at a copy of the article, fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. Camilla was across from him, furious. "This is slander," she said. "You should sue. Demand retractions." Malcolm shook his head. "They want me in court. That's a game they fund. They drag it out, then say the truth's uncertain. They don't need to win, Camilla. They just need to exhaust me." She looked at him, unsure what scared her more, that he was right or that he was already so tired. But Malcolm wasn't retreating. He was preparing. "I still have the tape," he said. Camilla blinked. "The what?" Malcolm reached into his bag and pulled out an old VHS, its label faded, nearly unreadable. WNYC Public Access, May 1987. "Interview I did," he said, "right after they cut me out. I told everything. No one aired it. Said it was too sensitive, but the master's still here." Camilla leaned forward, heart thumping. "You want to release it?" Malcolm smiled, slow and certain. "I think it's time people heard me in my own words." The next morning, with the help of a local archivist, the tape was digitized, and by 10:07 a.m., it went live. The footage was grainy but powerful. Malcolm, younger, still sharp-eyed, sat in a tiny studio across from a timid host. "They told me I was lucky to even be in the room," he said on camera. "But I helped draw those blueprints. I scouted the land. I brought in the investors. Then one day I was told the partnership dissolved. No meeting, no vote, just a letter." "You think it was because you're black?" the host asked. Malcolm didn't blink. "I don't think. I know. The video hit 100,000 views by noon, 500,000 by night, and with it, the tide turned, again. But crossing lines comes at a cost." That evening, Camilla returned to her apartment to find her front door unlocked. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, just moved. Her files, her bag, her flash drive that held backups of Malcolm's documents, gone. On her bathroom mirror, in red lipstick, "You're next, receptionist." She called Malcolm immediately. "I can't stay silent anymore," she whispered. "They're not just trying to silence you. They're going after anyone who holds the story." Malcolm's voice on the other end was calm, but colder than she'd ever heard it. "They crossed the line," he said. "Then we cross it back." Camilla didn't go back to her apartment that night. She couldn't. She stayed at a friend's place uptown, someone from college she hadn't spoken to in years but trusted enough to text one sentence: "Need a couch. Urgent." The message on her mirror haunted her. "Your next, receptionist." Simple, crude, personal, not just a threat, a warning They weren't trying to scare her off the story anymore. They were warning her not to become part of it. By 9 a.m. the next day, security at the Avalon had doubled, but not to protect Malcolm, to protect the narrative. New signs were posted at the front entrance. No unauthorized filming, no live streaming, no loitering in common areas. Inside, management had deployed what Camilla privately called the cleanup crew, a group of smiling PR interns whose job was to shake hands, issue complimentary spa vouchers, and smother the truth with hospitality. Philip Darden hadn't been seen publicly since the sit-in, but his power lingered like perfume, present even when invisible. Down in Harlem, Malcolm was meeting with someone else. Her name was Tessa Vance, a former city zoning official who had quietly resigned in 1990 after a whistleblowing attempt was buried and blacklisted. She was in her 60s now, soft-spoken, with thick glasses and a calm that bordered on eerie. She held a binder full of scanned memos, letters, grant approvals, and 3 notarized statements, all dated between 1985 and 1987. "You weren't the only one they erased," she told Malcolm, flipping a page. "But you were the one they feared the most. You had too many blueprints with your name on them." Malcolm looked through the pages. He paused at one letter in particular. "We suggest removing Reed from any visible project roles. His background, while notable, does not reflect the aspirational brand we intend to promote. The letterhead, Darden and Sons Development Group." Malcolm didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "We bring this public." Tessa nodded once. Later that afternoon, the second documentary-style video went live, titled simply, "The Blueprint They Stole." Narrated by a black voice actor with a tone like velvet and iron, the video walked viewers through Malcolm's early work on urban redevelopment, the zoning fights, the forced buyout. Screenshots of legal documents flashed across the screen. Quotes from Tessa, footage from the 1987 interview, photos of Malcolm, young and bright-eyed, standing in front of Avalon's original construction site. At the end, the narrator's voice dropped. "They built their story by stealing a black man's foundation. But no matter how tall the building, the truth always rises." The video hit 1 million views in 5 hours. That night, the hotel's glass entrance was shattered. Not from violence, from pressure. Too many people were showing up. Protesters, reporters, architects, historians, former staffers who remembered Malcolm's name from old payroll sheets. The Avalon was becoming a crime scene wrapped in luxury, and the board was panicking. Camilla knew something big was coming when Philip called an all-staff meeting at 11 p.m. No agenda, just a mandatory attendance email. They gathered in the grand ballroom, every bellhop, housekeeper, concierge, and desk agent. Philip stood on the small stage under a crystal chandelier that suddenly felt more like a spotlight. His voice was tired, but still trying to sound in control. "I know it's been a difficult week," he began. "We've all seen the headlines, the noise, but I need to remind you, this is your job, your livelihood, and your silence is your duty." Murmurs, unease. Philip continued, "If you speak to media, if you share internal documents, you're not just breaching contract, you're betraying this team. There will be consequences." Camilla raised her hand. The room froze. Philip blinked. "Yes, Ms. Soto?" Her voice was calm, even. "What are the consequences," she asked, "for betraying history?" No one breathed. Philip didn't answer. He just turned and walked off the stage. After the meeting, Camilla received a silent nod from Diana across the hall, and later a message on her burner phone from Malcolm. "They're losing grip. That means we're getting close." The hoodie wasn't just a symbol now. It was a movement. A dozen architecture students arrived the next morning wearing hoodies printed with blueprints. Staff wore pins shaped like tiny bricks. Camilla noticed a new spray paint message near the service entrance. "This black story doesn't need permission." And then, just before midnight, an anonymous Dropbox link began circulating on message boards. The Avalon audio files. Raw recordings from 1986, 1987. Hundreds of hours, phone calls, board meetings, planning sessions, and in one clip, a young Philip Darden's voice, clear and smug. He's brilliant, but he doesn't belong in the front office. This isn't a hoodie-friendly brand. The city didn't sleep that night, not because of sirens, not because of car horns, but because something far older was waking up. Truth, and not the kind printed in headlines, but the kind carved into walls, etched in sacrifice, protected by people who had everything to lose and still chose to speak. At 2:11 a.m., the Avalon audio files hit their peak virality. Reddit was ablaze. Clips flooded TikTok. A podcast spliced Malcolm's old blueprints with Darden's voice saying, "This isn't a hoodie-friendly brand," and ended with the host whispering, "It is now." But while the internet roared, Malcolm Reed sat in the dark corner of a Harlem church basement, hoodie over his head, eyes closed, listening to the world he'd been erased from to say his name again. Across the city, Philip Darden couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse apartment, above the very hotel built on a name he tried to erase, pacing. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was threatening. His lawyers had gone quiet. His PR team was now reevaluating strategies. And earlier that evening, a junior investor had called and said flat out, "If this goes class action, I'm out." Then came the call he feared most. Blocked number. He let it ring. It rang again. He answered. A voice, calm and low. "You built the Avalon on shadows, but shadows don't stay quiet forever." The line clicked off. Philip stood frozen, sweat on his brow. Not because of what had been said, but because he knew exactly who said it. Morning arrived with a reckoning. At 8:04 a.m., Malcolm walked into City Hall. Not alone. At his side were 3 attorneys, 2 civil rights organizers, and Tessa Vance, armed with decades of suppressed documents and a prepared legal brief for property fraud, civil conspiracy, and historical erasure. Outside, crowds gathered once more. Only this time, it wasn't just students or activists. It was city workers, bus drivers in uniform, postal workers on break, architects holding blueprint scrolls with Malcolm's name written in black marker. And standing at the edge of the crowd, hood pulled up, arms crossed, was Jordan Price. Alive, quiet, but watching. When Camilla saw him, she ran. "Where have you been?" Jordan gave a weak smile. "They tried to bury me with HR paperwork and threats. But a story like this?" He won. Not because he sought revenge, but because he carried truth that had endured 35 years of silence. He reached into his sack, pulled out the same deed from that rainy day, then held it beside a 1987 architectural rendering, his signature still visible in the corner. "My name was never missing," he said. "They just hid it." Then came the final blow. Tessa Vance stepped forward holding a small recorder. "This is a confession," she said. "Philip Darden, 1987, during an off-the-record meeting, he said, and I quote, 'The kid had vision, but he didn't fit the image. This city needs white marble, not black stories.'" Gasps filled the room. Someone cried, another clapped. But Malcolm stayed still, because he'd known all along. He didn't need an apology. He just needed the world to hear the lie from their lips. Back at the Avalon, staff gathered near the lobby windows, watching the City Hall broadcast from someone's phone. Diana wiped her eyes. Camilla just whispered, "He did it." And on the floor beneath them, in a corner once used for janitorial storage, someone had spray-painted a message in silver. "This story started in silence. It ends in justice." Outside, the crowd erupted as the city clerk stepped up and read an official statement. "By authority of the City of New York, we acknowledge that Malcolm Elijah Reed was a rightful co-founder and stakeholder in the development now known as the Avalon. Legal remedies are under active review." Malcolm didn't smile. He just nodded once. then turned to walk down the steps of City Hall. The crowd parted, phones rose, and as he moved through them, someone yelled, "Hey, Malcolm, you going to change the name of the hotel?" He paused, looked back over his shoulder, and said, "No, let the name stay, so the world remembers what happens when you forget who laid the first brick." The next morning, the wind changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no thunderstorm, no blackout, but the city felt different. Maybe it was the way people glanced longer at the plaques they used to ignore, or how the staff at the Avalon paused before clocking in, or how Malcolm Reed's name, once buried under silence, now echoed from courthouse steps to classroom lectures across the 5 boroughs. But something else shifted too: power. And that shift had one very real consequence. The ones who had pulled strings in the shadows thus began to squirm. At exactly 7:46 a.m., a black sedan pulled up to the Avalon's loading dock. It didn't belong to any delivery vendor. No license plate, tinted windows. From inside stepped a man wearing a charcoal gray overcoat, clean-shaven, late 50s, the kind of posture that didn't require intimidation. It carried authority and silence. His name wasn't on any employee roster, but the moment he entered the building, Philip Darden was paged. Philip met him in the private dining salon, away from reporters, cameras, and staff. "Mr. Ashcroft," Philip said, voice tight, "you weren't supposed to be involved in this." Ashcroft poured himself a glass of water from the crystal decanter at the table and replied, calm as winter wind, "You told me the situation was under control." Philip hesitated. It was, until the girl. The footage. The old man showing up again. Then the audio leaks. Ashcroft raised a hand. Not rude, just final. "You failed." It wasn't a question. Philip stiffened. "I've served this family, this enterprise, for decades. I took risks you asked me to take, and now we take the fallout," Ashcroft interrupted, quietly, strategically. "But make no mistake, Philip, someone has to pay." Philip swallowed. "Are you saying they're cutting me loose?" Ashcroft gave a small, unreadable smile. "I'm saying the building is on fire, and it's easier to throw out one man than let it burn to the foundation." At the same time, across Harlem, Malcolm stood inside a forgotten brick building on 147th Street, the one with the rusted sign that read, "Reed and Willow, Architecture, Legacy, Restoration." It had been boarded up for years. Vandals tagged the walls. The roof leaked. But to Malcolm, it wasn't decay. It was proof he'd existed. Jordan was there, arms crossed, taking it all in. "You think we can bring this place back?" Malcolm didn't answer immediately. He walked over to the corner of the room where a dust-covered drafting table still stood. His fingers brushed the edge. "I'm not interested in bringing it back," he said. "I'm interested in building what should have been." Meanwhile, Camilla was preparing for a very different kind of return. The city had invited Malcolm to appear at a televised town hall forum, a roundtable on urban displacement, architectural erasure, and reparative city planning. At first, Malcolm declined. He didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted the story told. But then, they told him Ashcroft would be there. Ashcroft. The name rippled through every quiet corner of city development. He never held office, never stood behind a podium, but his hands touched everything. Zoning approvals, campaign donations, backdoor fund transfers. He moved like fog, but when he landed on a project, he left behind contracts and consequences. He was the man behind Darden's throne, and Malcolm knew it. So when the invitation came again, he said one word: yes. The town hall was hosted inside the Harlem Civic Center, a circular building with high domes and acoustics made for echoes. Reporters flooded the lobby. Protesters waited outside, peaceful but bold. Some held signs that read, "From the basement to the blueprint. Black history built this block. The hoodie holds truth." Inside, the panel was already seated when Malcolm entered. He wore the hoodie, same one, faded now, washed only twice since that first rainstorm. But it still fit him the same way a crown fits a king who never needed one. Ashcroft was across the stage, stone-faced, not in fear, in calculation, because he knew who he was really facing now. Not a tired old man with a bag of papers, but a man whose story had outlived 30 years of silence, lawsuits, and sabotage. A moderator introduced the guests, then turned to Malcolm. "Mr. Reed," she said, "after everything that's come to light, what would you say to those who still question the legitimacy of your claims?" Malcolm looked down, touched the cuff of his hoodie, then leaned into the mic. "I don't need to prove what's already built. The Avalon stands on my foundation. You walk on my plans every time you check into that lobby. But go ahead, check the floor." A pause. Then he added, "The city didn't just erase my name. It tried to erase the black story behind the hoodie. And I'm here to tell you, hoodies don't lie. Politicians do." The moderator turned to Ashcroft. He smiled, but the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Mr. Reed speaks with passion," he said, "but cities are built on contracts, not sentiment. If he had rightful stake, he should have acted within the system." Malcolm stared at him, and then, calm as ever, "You built the system to keep me out." For a long moment, the town hall was still. Even the air seemed to pause, suspended in the space between Malcolm's words and the city's denial. A line had been drawn, not by noise, not by protest signs, but by truth quietly spoken into a microphone. Across from him, Ashcroft adjusted his cufflinks. A small motion, almost casual, but anyone who knew power recognized it for what it was, a stalling tactic. He didn't answer right away. Let the silence drag just long enough to feel like control. Then with a polite chuckle, he leaned into his mic. "Mr. Reed speaks like a man who suffered," he began, "and for that, I have sympathy. But business, real business, is not about emotion. It's about agreements, signatures, risk." He glanced at the crowd, then back to Malcolm. "If we were to go back and unravel every deal from 30 years ago, based on memory and sentiment, the city would fall apart." The audience shifted, unease rippling through the rows. Malcolm let the man finish. Then he reached down into the side pocket of his hoodie and pulled out something small, barely noticeable from a distance. A cassette recorder, old scuffed, the kind used in offices before digital files took over. He placed it on the table between them and hit play. The speakers crackled. Then came the voice. "We'll move Reed out quietly. Use Clause 4. Tell him the funding didn't materialize. No headlines, just bury it. By the time he realizes what happened, the foundation will already be poured." A beat of silence. Then another voice, Ashcroft's. "He's too smart. Don't push too hard. Just enough to make him tired." People forget tired black men, especially when they wear hoodies instead of suits. Gasps erupted across the room. Ashcroft didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the table. Camilla, watching from backstage, nearly dropped her phone. Diana, seated beside her, squeezed her hand. The journalists in the press row scrambled to tweet, record, push the moment to their editors. Within minutes, Ashcroft tape was trending worldwide. And Malcolm? He sat back in his chair. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He just let the truth do what truth does when it's finally allowed to breathe. Ashcroft finally spoke, voice colder now. "That recording was illegally obtained." Malcolm shrugged. "That's the thing about shadows," he said. "They think no one's listening." Then turning to the audience, "You didn't just erase me. You erased generations of black architects, planners, and builders whose names never made the marble walls. You said we didn't fit the brand, but we were the blueprint." He tapped the recorder. "This was never about business. It was about image, control, legacy. Then softly, and now you lost it. Later that day, the city announced it would open an independent investigation into Avalon's original land deal. They called it a symbolic gesture, but to the people watching, to the black students who'd only ever read about names like Reed in footnotes, it wasn't symbolic. It was proof. Proof that a hoodie didn't mean threat, that a black story didn't mean pity, that truth, when spoken by the quiet ones, could shake boardrooms to their foundation. Camilla met Malcolm that night at a diner on 139th Street. He looked tired, but not broken. She slid into the booth across from him. "They're scared now," she said. Malcolm stirred his coffee. "They were always scared. That's why they erased me. Fear doesn't come from weakness. It comes from knowing you've done wrong." He sipped, then added, "They built empires on our silence, but they never considered what happens when the silence learns to speak." Camilla smiled. "You gonna keep speaking?" Malcolm looked out the window, watching a group of young black kids skateboard past, all of them in hoodies. "I don't have to," he said. "They will." The next morning, the Avalon's front doors were chained shut. A notice from the city's legal office was taped to the glass. "Under investigation for historic fraud and civil rights violations." Inside, a single chair remained in the middle of the lobby. On it, someone had placed an envelope. Inside the envelope, a brick, wrapped in a blueprint, with 3 words written across the top: "This is ours." 3 days later, Malcolm Reed was on every major network. Not because he gave interviews, he refused them. Not because he filed a lawsuit, he hadn't. And not because he demanded headlines or compensation, but because the country couldn't stop talking about him, about the black man in the hoodie who sat silently in the center of power and made the room listen. About the story that had been hidden not in ashes, but in filing cabinets and forgotten blueprints. About how a man nearly erased by history chose not to scream, but to speak. And when he did, the silence around him shattered. Camilla scrolled through the headlines on her lunch break. "The man who built the Avalon. A legacy restored." This hoodie was never just clothing. It was proof. Philip Darden resigns amid mounting pressure. Ashcroft silent. She looked up from her phone, out across the street, where construction workers on scaffolding were hammering into the bones of a new building going up on 148th. On the temporary plywood wall, someone had graffitied in thick black letters, "Designed by ghosts, built by truth." She smiled, not because it was over, but because it wasn't. It had only just begun. That evening, Malcolm met Jordan and Diana outside the gates of the old Reed and Willow building. This time, it wasn't about hiding. It was about restoring. Malcolm stood silently as a locksmith pried open the corroded lock and stepped back. He didn't rush in. He let the door swing open slowly, the creak echoing like a memory unburied. Dust motes floated in the afternoon light, like 100 sleeping stories waking all at once. Jordan stood behind him. "You gonna reopen this place?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. He stepped through the door, ran his fingers along the wall, then pointed to a framed photo still hanging sideways in the corner. It was a black and white photograph. 2 men, one black, one white, smiling, standing shoulder to shoulder over the first set of Avalon blueprints. Both were younger. One was forgotten, until now. The news broke the following morning. Malcolm Reed to found Institute for Equitable Urban Design, backed by community funds, public donations, and several major universities. The Institute would operate from Reed and Willow's old building, offering scholarships, apprenticeships, and legal support to marginalized creators in architecture and urban development. But Malcolm himself, he wouldn't lead it. In the press statement he handwrote, he said, "I didn't fight to be famous. I fought to be remembered for the right reason. This is no longer my story. It's yours now. Take the brick. Build something better." 2 days later, Malcolm left the city. No cameras followed. No media vans chased. He slipped out the same way he'd first entered, quietly unnoticed by those still looking for drama instead of justice. Camilla got the text just after 7:20 a.m. "You did good. Keep the light on." M. She didn't reply. She just turned off the ringer and looked out her window at the city he helped shape. Weeks passed. The Avalon stayed shuttered. Ashcroft never resurfaced. Philip Darden was last seen boarding a private jet to Zurich. But on Malcolm's Old Street in Harlem, a mural appeared overnight, painted in grayscale, with bold red text above it. A man in a hoodie walked in. A legacy walked out. Below it, smaller in silver. This black story was always here. You just weren't listening. In the final video Camilla posted to her channel, a 3-minute tribute with no narration, no music, she showed the city from above. The buildings, the alleys, the churches and rooftops. Then it cut to a still shot of Malcolm, sitting on that Avalon lobby floor. Hoodie up, head bowed. Captioned simply, "Power doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just waits and then whispers the truth." It didn't happen all at once. Fall rarely does. Not the kind that breaks bones. The kind that breaks legacies. The kind that makes a name once carved in marble feel like graffiti. Ugly, unwanted, something to be power washed away. At the Avalon, the Golden Darden ballroom sign was quietly taken down one morning. No announcement, no press release, just 2 maintenance workers and a crowbar. By noon, someone had already taken a photo, posted it with one word: accountability. But the cracks had started days before, right after the Ashcroft tape aired. Within hours, city officials began tripping over each other to distance themselves from the Darden family. Press conferences were held, donations returned, buildings renamed, old connections erased with new headlines like, "Councilman denies knowledge of Avalon land," "Deal investors shocked by Ashcroft corruption ties," "Philip Darden resigns from real estate board amid allegations." But the story wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about evidence. And Malcolm Reed had brought more than blueprints. He'd brought receipts. Camilla watched the collapse unfold like a slow-motion avalanche. Every morning, a new domino fell. A grant withdrawn, a contract revoked, a property reevaluated. She sat at the newly opened Reed Institute, inside the very building that once bore broken locks and cobwebs, and sifted through paperwork from volunteers. They weren't lawyers, not all of them, but they were angry and they were organized. And that was enough. They tracked shell companies, connected dots between Ashcroft's private holdings and the city's luxury zoning ordinances. And at the center of that tangled web, a single memo, handwritten, initialed. Reed's ownership remains undocumented publicly. Proceed with silent termination and reallocation of shares via proxy entity. Signed, P. Darden. The legal hammer dropped next. The city's attorney general announced a grand jury investigation into historical zoning fraud, property theft by false representation, systemic exclusion of minority developers from publicly funded projects the press tried to keep up. But the internet didn't wait. A viral infographic labeled "The Darden Scheme" made rounds on social media, complete with timelines, scanned signatures, and a photo of a young Philip shaking hands with Ashcroft in front of a model of the Avalon. Underneath it, someone had captioned, "You stole from a man in a hoodie." Now the hoodie owns the story. But it wasn't just headlines anymore. It was money. Investors pulled out of 3 Darden-backed developments in Brooklyn and Queens. Class action lawsuit filed on behalf of minority developers denied access to funding in the last 30 years. Gathered 6,000 signatures in 72 hours. Then came the subpoenas. Philip Darden was officially served outside his Westchester estate at 6:12 a.m., just as he stepped out to get his morning newspaper. The image, snapped by a passing cyclist and uploaded online, was shared over 4 million times in a day. In it, Philip wears a silk robe. In one hand, a coffee mug. In the other, a white envelope stamped "State of New York." Ashcroft, however, was harder to catch. No fixed address, no corporate role, just decades of fingerprints and whispers. But the shadows no longer protected him, because people were finally willing to talk. An anonymous city clerk submitted sealed audio to prosecutors, recordings of meetings between Ashcroft and developers, where racial profiling was discussed in plain language. An old secretary came forward with typed memos. A former city planner released scanned notebooks with meeting summaries that included names, times, dates, everything. And in each, one name repeated like a drum beat: Reed, the man they erased. Now the reason their empires crumbled. Back at the Avalon, the lobby sat empty. A thin layer of dust settled over the once busy concierge desk. The floral arrangements had wilted. Even the chandelier seemed to hang lower, as if mourning its own complicity. On the marble floor where Malcolm once sat, someone had chalked a simple message: built by black hands, stolen by white lies, returned by truth. Camilla stood there just before sunset, staring at those words. A news crew passed by, prepping for another segment. She didn't need to watch it. She was already living the aftermath. And this time, she wasn't a receptionist watching injustice walk past her desk. She was the one holding the door open as justice finally walked in. The hearings began on a gray Monday morning. Held in a downtown courthouse built of cold stone and old money, it was the same building where, decades earlier, Malcolm Reed had once stood outside, unwelcome, unheard. But this time, his name was on every document in the courtroom, not as a defendant, not as a witness, but as the reason they were all there. Philip Darden sat stiffly behind the defense table. Gone was the tailored charm, the designer suit sheen. His blazer fit looser now, his face paler. The weight of exposure wasn't just on his shoulders, it was in his bones. He'd spent his life believing his version of the story would be the only one told. But now the original author had come back to finish the last chapter, and this time, the margins were full of truth. On day one, the prosecution opened with evidence that hit like a freight train. A slideshow projected onto the courtroom screen. The 1975 partnership agreement with Malcolm's name clearly signed. Internal memos outlining plans to dissolve his stake without notice. Tax records showing payments diverted to shell companies. Audio clips, Ashcroft's voice calling Malcolm a PR risk in a hoodie. The jury didn't flinch. They listened. They watched. They understood. Because when you put a black man in a hoodie on trial without a gavel, you call it business. But when you flip the lights on, you call it theft. Camilla sat in the gallery, notebook in hand, eyes sharp, not just for Malcolm, but for every name buried in boardroom archives, for every undocumented partner and silent contributor whose legacy was paved over with white marble and clean fonts. Next to her, Jordan whispered, "Think they'll take down the whole firm?" Camilla didn't look away from the front. "I think they already have." Outside, the city responded. Community groups demanded audits of every public-private real estate deal made under Ashcroft's advisory role. Universities re-examined donor legacies. Historical societies began collecting Malcolm's designs, journals, and renderings, preparing to archive them for public display. Even the mayor, who once brushed off the story as a complicated legal matter, stood on the steps of City Hall and declared, "This wasn't just corruption, it was erasure, and we're going to make it right." But not everyone surrendered quietly. On the third day of hearings, Philip's legal team played their final hand. They brought forward a statement from a former Reed and Willow associate, an older white man who claimed Malcolm had agreed to walk away from the project in 1986. They called it a gentleman's deal. They said there was no bad blood. Camilla felt her hands clench. But Malcolm, he just looked up at the man, nodded once, and asked for permission to speak. The judge allowed it. And for the next 5 minutes, Malcolm told the courtroom, in excruciating detail, exactly how that gentleman's deal went down. "I walked into that boardroom thinking I had a seat. They served coffee like it meant something. And when I asked about the deed, They handed me a check and told me to leave quietly. I didn't walk away. I was walked over, and I never cashed that check because my name was worth more than any dollar amount you wrote in that silence. The courtroom was still. In that silence, it belonged to him now. By week's end, subpoenas reached 3 more firms. Ashcroft's offshore accounts were frozen, and a landmark decision came down from the Department of Urban Planning. All future zoning developments would now require disclosure of historical land disputes in equity contributions. They called it the Reed provision. Malcolm called it a brick. Not a wall, he explained to a group of students. Just one brick. But bricks add up. Back at the Reed Institute, Camilla opened an envelope sent anonymously. Inside was a photo. A young Malcolm, grinning, blueprint in hand, standing outside the original Avalon construction site. On the back, someone had scribbled, "He never needed a title. He had the foundation." The next day, the Avalon's marquee sign was quietly replaced. No press, no press release, just new letters, gold and modest. The Reed Hotel Camilla passed by just before dawn and saw a small boy on the sidewalk staring up at it. He tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Why is it called that?" His mom smiled. "Because it's finally telling the right story." It was the final day of the hearing. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed, not with outrage, but with anticipation. There were no angry chants now, no riot cops, just clusters of community members in folding chairs, students with clipboards, families with children perched on their laps. They weren't waiting for justice. They were waiting for closure. Inside, the courtroom brimmed with silence. All the arguments had been made. All the files entered into record. All the ghosts had spoken. Now they were just waiting on the judge. Philip Darden sat with his hands folded, no longer looking like the man who once strutted through lobbies like he owned the air inside them. His eyes were bloodshot. His tie was crooked. No lawyers flanked him today, only the weight of his choices. At the other table, Malcolm sat quietly. He wore a navy sport coat over his hoodie, one clean, ironed, respectful, but he left the hood resting gently over his shoulders. He wasn't there to prove respectability. He was there to prove truth could sit in any seat, in any clothing, and still stand taller than lies. The judge spoke slowly, as if carving each word in stone. This court finds that a pattern of intentional exclusion, racial discrimination, and financial manipulation was carried out in the development and ownership transfer of the Avalon property between 1985 and 1987. We further find that Mr. Malcolm Elijah Reed's original equity, intellectual property, and founding contributions were deliberately hidden to preserve the financial and racial homogeneity of the Darden-led firm. This ruling restores those rights. He paused. Let the record show. The court does not simply recognize Mr. Reed, it remembers him. A hush, then applause. From the gallery, from the halls, even from the steps outside. Not loud, but long, like rain falling on thirsty ground. Later that day, Philip Darden was indicted on charges of fraudulent misrepresentation, civil conspiracy, and perjury under oath. He would be held under house arrest until trial. His estate in Westchester was seized. His firm collapsed within a week, and the city began the slow, painful process of pulling down the marble names etched onto buildings Malcolm helped dream into existence. Back in Harlem, things were quieter, but not slower. The Reed Institute announced full scholarships for 10 students from underrepresented communities. Camilla and Jordan hosted the first Brick by Brick lecture series, bringing in architects, activists, and artists to speak on reclaiming space, memory, and voice. At the opening ceremony, a child in the front row asked a question during the Q&A. Why did they erase Mr. Malcolm? The room held its breath. Malcolm, seated at the side of the stage, leaned forward and answered, "Because I made them uncomfortable. But now, I hope I make you brave." On the first day of spring, the city renamed the block between 145th and 147th Street Malcolm E. Reed Way. Camilla stood beneath the New Green Street sign and looked down the sidewalk. Kids played basketball in the park. A mural covered the side of a building. Malcolm standing with a blueprint, hoodie up, behind him the skyline of a city he helped build, and below him the words, "Truth wears hoodies too." In the final scene of the last video Camilla ever uploaded to the story's archive, she stood in front of the Reed Hotel. She didn't say anything. She just held up a brick. One of the original bricks pulled from the first Avalon construction site, cracked, worn, but whole. A caption appeared on screen. They tried to bury his name, but they forgot he was the foundation. They offered Malcolm a statue, a bronze one, full-size, elegant, stylized. They wanted to place it right in the courtyard of the newly renamed Reed Hotel, once the Avalon. A man in a hoodie, one hand holding a rolled blueprint, the other on his knee, gaze pointed toward the horizon like he was dreaming up a better city. They said it would honor him. They said it would be permanent. They said his story deserved to be cast in metal. Malcolm declined. He didn't want to be a statue. "Statues don't move," he said. "I'm not here to be still. I'm here to keep the story moving." The Reed Institute opened its doors that same spring. No red carpet, no ribbon cutting. Just Malcolm unlocking the front door of the old Reed and Willow office with the same brass key he'd kept in a tin box for 37 years. There was no press, no mayor, just 20 students standing on the sidewalk in mismatched clothes and nervous silence, holding sketchbooks, camera bags, and laptop cases scuffed from years of travel. Some of them wore hoodies. Most were black. All of them were hungry for permission, for platform, for a place to begin. "Why us?" one of them asked as they entered the first room, an old drafting hall with crooked windows and sunlight slanting across the dusty floor. Malcolm leaned against the doorframe, hands in his hoodie pockets. "Because no one gave me permission when I started," he said. "I had to claim my seat at the table. You won't have to." He pointed to the worn drafting desks and taped up rulers on the wall. "You're not guests here," he said. "You're the architects now." Camilla helped run the intake process. She wasn't a teacher by trade, but she didn't need a syllabus to teach what mattered. She taught them how to read between the lines on a contract, how to question a zoning clause that sounded too convenient, how to walk into a boardroom without shrinking, and more than anything, how to protect their story before someone else rewrote it. The Institute didn't have endless funding. The roof still leaked in 2 rooms. The bathroom sinks rattled when the pressure spiked. They shared 3 printers, 1 coffee machine, but every Friday the building buzzed like a living heart. Guest speakers came from all over, young black architects from Detroit, civil rights attorneys from Chicago, housing activists from LA. They talked about building equity, not just buildings, about how blueprints could become battle cries, about how a hoodie in a boardroom wasn't a threat, it was the uniform of the revolution. In the center hallway, where the old Reed and Willow logo once hung, they painted a mural. It wasn't flashy, it showed no face, just a figure back-turned, walking down a long hallway made of crumbling legal documents, torn city maps, and red-line neighborhoods. The figure wore a hoodie, and in their hand they held a brick. Outside, the city kept spinning. The Reed Hotel reopened with a new mission, staffed largely by people of color, curated with artwork by formerly displaced residents, and featuring an open gallery on the first floor titled "Erased, Remembered, Rebuilt." Tourists came in for the luxury, but they left with names they'd never been taught. Children took field trips there. They'd walk through the old ballroom, once the Darden Ballroom, now renamed the Malcolm E. Reed Community Hall, and sit in a circle on the same floor where Malcolm once sat alone during the protest. They listened to a tour guide say, "He didn't yell, he didn't beg, he sat," and the city stood up. Elsewhere, the movement spread. In Baltimore, a group of students launched a podcast titled Black Story Blueprints. In Oakland, city planners started a mentorship initiative called the Hoodie Fellowship. And in Memphis, a public library hosted a design challenge for teenagers to rebuild the spaces they feel left out of. The winning submission? A kid named KJ, 14, afro high, eyes full of fire, drew a bus stop shelter shaped like a hoodie. In his proposal, he wrote, "Everyone waits in the rain, but some of us wait longer. This shelter is for them." The hoodie keeps the story dry. Malcolm didn't attend any of those events. He didn't need to. He sat in the Institute's main office most days, reading, mentoring, sketching in the margins of his old journals. He kept a stack of letters from students around the world. Most started the same way. "I didn't know we could be in the blueprints." One afternoon, a local news anchor finally got him on the record. They asked what legacy he hoped to leave. Malcolm took a breath, then said, "Legacy's not what you leave behind. It's what you make possible." It started in Chicago. A young black designer named Tariq Madden published a manifesto online titled The Hoodie Manifest, Designing Against Erasure. It wasn't long, just 12 pages of raw conviction, personal story, and city data, but it lit up the internet like a match in a room full of gas. He wrote, "They called us angry. They called us unprofessional. They said a hoodie meant danger. But now the hoodie means we were right. The hoodie means we were here before the paperwork. The hoodie means we built it even if they took the credit. The hoodie means this black story is not waiting for permission anymore." Tariq cited Malcolm as the source, but he didn't worship him. He called him a starter brick. Malcolm Reed cracked the concrete. Now we lay the next row. The manifesto exploded. Within a week, colleges across the country adopted it as reading material in urban design and political science departments. Architectural firms started re-examining their hiring practices, legacy portfolios, and naming policies. One firm in Boston took down every founder's portrait in their lobby and replaced them with blank white slates titled, "Who's Missing?" Another in San Diego launched an initiative to fund land reclamation studies for Black and Indigenous communities. But it wasn't just policy shifts, it was energy. It was young creators saying, "We don't need your table. We'll build our own." And their uniform, not a tie, not a badge, not a press credential, a hoodie. Camilla felt it too. The Institute was overflowing Indigenous communities. But it wasn't just policy shifts, it was energy. It was young creators saying, "We don't need your table. We'll build our own." And their uniform, not a tie, not a badge, not a press credential, a hoodie. Camilla felt it too. The Institute was overflowing. Applications doubled within 4 months. They had to turn students away, not because they lacked potential, but because the city couldn't keep up with the demand for space, tools, funding. Malcolm refused to raise tuition, so Camilla and Jordan started a public fund. It wasn't flashy, just a GoFundMe called Brick Money, Help Build Stories That Last. It passed $1 million in 11 days. Donors weren't celebrities or corporations. They were subway drivers, barbers, teachers, nurses, people who'd seen what it looked like when someone told the truth and refused to cash out on it. One day, Camilla found Malcolm in the archive room, sorting through old paper files and blueprints. She laughed. "You know we scanned all those, right?" He looked up, smirking. "I trust paper. It don't glitch when Wi-Fi goes out." She sat next to him. "You know they're going to make a movie about you eventually," she said. "I hope not," he replied. "They'll get it wrong." "Then write your own," she said. "Or better, let the students write it." He nodded slowly, then looked her in the eye. "You ever think maybe the real lesson wasn't me getting my name back? Maybe it was teaching y'all how to fight for yours before someone takes it." That weekend, during a guest lecture at NYU, Jordan stood before a packed room of students and told a story that wasn't in the textbooks. He didn't quote legislation. He didn't name-drop theorists. He just said, "We used to whisper, then we wrote, then we filmed." Then one man in a hoodie sat down, and the whole damn building started listening. He ended the talk with silence. because that's how it had started. And that's how Malcolm had always done it. No shouting, no spectacle, just presence. In New Orleans, the city council voted to rename a rebuilt levee station after Malcolm. In Seattle, a new design school opened called Reed West. And in Ghana, a group of students sent a care package to the institute with a note that read, "They erased your name in America, but we wrote it in the clay here." Inside the package was a handmade brick, etched with Malcolm's initials. He placed it on the window ledge of his office, right above the original 1974 land deed he'd once carried in a damp sack across a stormy city. And still, Malcolm said no to awards, no to honorary degrees, no to honorary streets beyond Harlem. He kept his hoodie. He kept his journal. He kept teaching. One night, Camilla asked him why. "Why not take it all?" "You earned it." He shook his head. "Because when they name something after you, they think that's the end. But I'm not a headline. I'm a blueprint. And blueprints don't stop at the first floor." The Reed Institute held its first graduation on a rainy June morning. There were no balloons, no massive stage, no celebrity keynotes, just folding chairs in the courtyard, mist on the bricks, and 20 students in mismatched robes. Some made their own from repurposed cloth, denim jackets, even a hoodie stitched into a gown. Camilla stood by the podium, wiping rain off her notes with her sleeve. Jordan fiddled with the speaker system, half laughing at the feedback buzz that refused to behave. And Malcolm? He was sitting in the back row, not on stage, not in the spotlight, just watching. When the final student crossed the makeshift stage, a girl named Danielle, who had arrived on the first day with a stutter and left with a scholarship to Columbia's graduate program, the crowd stood and applauded, not loud, but long, just like they had outside the courthouse. That rhythm of quiet reverence that seemed to follow Malcolm Reed wherever he went. When the crowd settled, Camilla took the mic. She didn't read from her speech. She didn't even look down at her notes. She looked out at the students, at the bricks behind them, at the worn banners tied to scaffolding, still reading, "This black story is still being written." Then she said, "You came here thinking you were learning how to build buildings. But what you really learned was how to hold space. Space for truth. Space for memory. Space for your name." She paused, her voice cracking slightly. "Malcolm didn't give us the answers. He gave us the questions we weren't allowed to ask before, and the courage to stay in the room long enough to hear them." Afterward, the students placed bricks on the wall behind the stage. One by one, each inscribed with their name, the year and a word, justice, resilience, unapologetic, home, begin. Malcolm didn't speak. He just nodded at each student, tapped a knuckle to his chest in solidarity, and watched. That night, the Institute held a small reception. Low lights, vinyl records spinning in the background, curry trays and lemonade on folding tables. Students took photos in front of the mural. They laughed too loud. They hugged too hard. They existed without apology. Camilla walked over to Malcolm, who was leaning against the window, watching the city breathe. "They did it," she said. He nodded. "Yeah, they did." She handed him a small box. Inside, a hand-carved plaque made from reclaimed wood, engraved with the words, "You are the door. We are the key." He ran his fingers across the grain, didn't say anything for a long moment, then whispered, "Now they can open anything." The next morning he was gone. No fanfare, no goodbye party, just a folded note on Camilla's desk. "Going south. Heard they're trying to build a school in Baton Rouge. Might need some help drawing the foundation." Taped beside it was a single brick, unmarked. Weeks passed. The Institute kept growing. Camilla took over as executive director. Jordan launched a satellite podcast network. Danielle returned as a visiting lecturer. Students from the first class stayed in touch, sending updates from across the country. They called it the Brick Line, an informal thread of architects, organizers, poets, engineers, each leaving something behind wherever they went. A bus stop, a youth center, a voting kiosk, a garden in a lot no one had touched in decades. None of it made the news, but if you looked close, you'd see the marks. A hoodie drawn in chalk, a quote etched in steel, a single red brick hidden in the wall, painted with the word story. One day, years later, a reporter called Camilla to ask for a quote for an article titled, "Whatever Happened to Malcolm Reed?" She paused, then said, "He's not gone. He just doesn't need to be seen anymore." He taught us that a real legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about making damn sure no one else gets forgotten. In a library in New Orleans, a teenager pulled a dusty book off a shelf. It had no title on the spine, just a sticker, H102. Inside were pages of blueprints, stories, court transcripts, sketches, student essays, and a photo of a man in a hoodie sitting on a hotel lobby floor. The teenager read it cover to cover, then whispered, "This is my story too." The city had changed, but its sidewalks remembered. The cracks still ran the same direction. The manholes still hissed when trains roared underground. And the pigeons still gathered near the same bakery on 183rd, waiting for crumbs that never came. But something was different now, because on a quiet morning, beneath a sky smudged with the silver of spring, a man in a faded hoodie walked alone down Malcolm E. Reed Way, formerly 147th Street, and the city, without meaning to, held its breath. He moved slowly, not like someone lost, but like someone measuring the ground beneath him, step by step, toe to heel, as if every brick in the pavement held a secret. And maybe it did, because this was the block where it started, where they erased his name, where they said he was lucky to be involved, where they built the Avalon on his silence, thinking it would last forever. Now, the Darden name was gone. And above the restored stone arch of what was once the hotel's main entrance, there hung a brushed steel sign. The Reed Hotel, built on truth, rebuilt with purpose. Malcolm stopped in front of it, hands in his pockets, hood up despite the warm breeze. He didn't smile, didn't need to. The building did it for him. Across the street, a young delivery guy paused on his e-scooter. He stared at Malcolm for a long second before blurting, "Yo, you him?" Malcolm looked over but didn't answer. The kid laughed nervously. "Sorry, just, I watched that live stream. My mom cried. She said you were the reason we didn't have to move out last year. Said you made people look again." Malcolm nodded once. "I didn't make them look," he said. "I just stopped letting them look away." Then he turned and kept walking. A block south, where the old Reed and Willow office had once stood shuttered and forgotten, now stood the Reed Institute for Equitable Design. Not fancy. No marble floors or velvet ropes. Just brick, glass, and community. Through the wide windows, he could see them. Students. Some in hoodies, others in sharp blazers. Some laughing, some sketching. One girl hunched over a scale model of a public library she was designing for Queens. Malcolm paused. Inside, Camilla looked up from her desk and saw him. She didn't wave. She just smiled. She knew he wouldn't come in. Instead, he turned the corner and walked past the side wall of the Institute, now home to a massive mural painted by students from the very first class. The mural showed a silhouette, a man in a hoodie standing with his back to the viewer, facing a skyline made of reclaimed bricks. Each brick was painted with a name, not of donors, but of voices that were once missing. The displaced, the denied, the discounted. At the center of the mural, painted in silver script, "You cannot erase what refuses to disappear." Malcolm touched the wall with his fingers. It was still wet in places, not from paint, from memory. By midday, he was walking through Marcus Garvey Park, where an open-air market had sprung up. Stalls made from recycled wood. Booths selling handmade journals, folded maps, and prints of blueprints scrawled with poetry. At one table, a boy not older than 12 was handing out pamphlets titled, "Rebuilding the Bronx, My Dream for Our Block." Malcolm stopped. The boy looked up. You want one, sir? Yeah, Malcolm said. Yeah, I do. The kid beamed and handed him the folded paper. Are you from around here? The boy asked. Malcolm thought for a moment. I'm from wherever the story keeps going. Later that day, Camilla stood at the front entrance of the Institute, watching the last of the volunteers lock up. She turned to Jordan. You think he's really leaving again? Jordan shrugged. He always leaves. Yeah, she said, but now people follow. He looked at her and smiled. Then maybe that's the point. In the distance, a train rumbled underground. A breeze moved down Malcolm E. Reed Way, and one man in a hoodie turned the corner, disappearing into the sun-glazed shadows of the city he had changed, not by demanding credit, but by giving others the courage to claim theirs. That night, across town in a public auditorium on 125th, the Reed Institute hosted its first ever community showcase. No tickets, no press, just folding chairs, a few standing mics, and rows of people, young, old, in suits and sneakers, filling the room with the quiet anticipation that only comes when something real is about to happen. The theme was simple: stories we were told not to tell. One by one, they stood at the mic. A bus driver who wrote poetry between stops. A woman who once cleaned offices but now owned a firm designing green rooftops in Bed-Stuy. A teenage boy who spoke about the time his landlord told him their building was being repurposed and how he learned to fight back. With blueprints, no applause, just head nods, soft hums, and that sacred silence of people really listening. At the back of the room, Camilla stood by the door, arms folded, eyes glistening. Next to her, Jordan whispered, "You think he'll come?" Camilla didn't answer, but she already knew, because Malcolm never needed a stage. He didn't need to hold the mic to be heard. He was already in every story. 3 blocks away, on the rooftop of a low-rise overlooking the East River, Malcolm sat with his hood up, legs crossed, watching the skyline. Beside him was a brick, not symbolic, real, chipped, faded, taken from the foundation of the original Avalon Hotel before the renovation, before it was renamed, reclaimed, rewritten. Malcolm had carried it with him for weeks now, not for memory, but for weight. Behind him, voices rose from open windows, laughter, a sermon on a podcast, children arguing over who got the last orange popsicle. Every now and then, a breeze swept through, lifting the edge of his hoodie, but he didn't flinch. This city once turned its back on him. Now it leaned forward, listening. On his phone, the live stream from the community showcase was running quietly. He watched as a girl named Ava, 17, first-generation Haitian-American, too nervous to make eye contact, stepped to the mic. Her voice trembled at first, then rose. I used to think cities were built by white men in hard hats. I never saw anyone who looked like me on a street sign. Then I read about Malcolm Reed, and now I carry bricks in my backpack, not because I want to throw them, but because I plan to place them. The crowd gave her more than applause. They gave her legacy. Malcolm smiled, a quiet one. Not prideful, just full. Back at the Institute, a student named Trey was working late. Headphones in, hoodie up, hunched over a 3D model of an affordable housing project he was designing for South Philly. He didn't hear Camilla enter. Burning the midnight oil? Trey jumped slightly, then laughed. Just tweaking the stairwell access, making sure wheelchair routes are real, not performative. Camilla raised an eyebrow. Been reading the Reed journals again? He smirked. Page 47. Design is only inclusive when it's inconvenient. She smiled. You ready to present this tomorrow? Trey leaned back in his chair. I was nervous, but then I remembered something he said. What's that? Trey looked down at his hands. You don't have to be loud to leave a mark. You just have to know what wall to put the brick in. The hoodie moved through all of it now. Not just on Malcolm's shoulders, but in classrooms, on construction sites, in mural paint and notebook sketches. It was no longer just fabric. It was fabrication of dreams, of new cities, of truth stitched into the seams. In Oakland, a girl wore one while giving her TEDx talk on equity in transportation design. In Detroit, a community center hung one in a glass case beside a plaque that read, "Worn by the one who reminded us, if you build without memory, you build nothing at all." Malcolm watched the stream end. The rooftop was quiet again. He stood slowly, stretched, and picked up the brick, turned it over in his hands like a sacred object, then walked to the corner of the roof where a planter box sat half empty. He placed the brick inside, not buried, visible, strong, ready to hold weight. The next morning, the city woke to a mural. No press release, no artist name, no sponsor logo. Just a wall on 134th Street, long ignored and peeling, now covered in soft gray tones with streaks of gold. At the center stood the outline of a man, back turned, hoodie up, walking into the light at the end of a long corridor made of bricks. Each brick stamped with words: truth, silence, resilience, memory. Read. Beneath the mural, painted in a quiet script, "The Hoodie Walks On." That's it. No date, no signature, just a message, a reminder, a continuation. Camilla saw it on her walk to the Institute. She stood across the street in the rain. No umbrella, just coffee in one hand, awe in the other. A woman passing by paused beside her and asked, "Is that him?" Camilla nodded once. All of us now. At the Institute that afternoon, the students didn't talk about Malcolm's whereabouts. They didn't need to. There was no rumor, no panic, no ceremony. The back office he used still held his mug, his notebooks, his sketch of the courthouse steps. But the chair was empty, and yet somehow full, because everywhere around them, the work continued. That week, a school in Baltimore installed a new wing designed entirely by Reed Fellows. In Houston, a low-income housing plan approved the first all-BIPOC design team in city history, led by a Reed alum. And in a small town outside Birmingham, a 15-year-old named Nina, whose father used to work maintenance at the old Avalon, was voted student council president after giving a campaign speech titled, "This hoodie isn't for hiding, it's for holding." Jordan launched a limited podcast episode, episode 100, Legacy in Silence. It featured only ambient city sounds, traffic, wind, footsteps on brick. Then midway through came Malcolm's voice, a clip never released before. "I didn't wear the hoodie because I was cold. I wore it because the world tried to forget me. And sometimes you've got to wrap yourself in the thing they fear, until they have no choice but to see you." The episode crashed servers, then broke records. Camilla gave her final lecture of the semester in front of the Institute's second graduating class, 27 students. Every one of them carried a brick, real, painted, symbolic. Some were gifts, some from childhood homes, some taken from demolished buildings with permission, some new. They placed them one by one into a foundation wall behind the courtyard garden. It wasn't for a monument. It wasn't for a statue. It was for weight, for truth, for future hands. And on a street far from Harlem, in a city that didn't know his name, a man in a hoodie walked into a hardware store. He bought 2 bags of cement mix, a level, a wheelbarrow, paid in cash. No one recognized him. But later, behind a rundown community center, a new wheelchair ramp began to take shape. Level, safe, respectful. No blueprints, just hands. A week later, a letter arrived at the Institute. No return address. Inside, a Polaroid of the ramp, a folded scrap of paper with 6 words, "The story keeps walking. Don't stop." Camilla placed it under glass in the front office, beside Malcolm's old sketch pad and a brick labeled 1974, original. That night, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, shadows stretched long over Reed Way, and a man walked down the block, hoodie up, sack over one shoulder, steps slow and unbothered. He didn't check his phone. didn't look back, didn't need directions, because he had given them all away. And now, the story could walk on its own. He didn't leave behind an empire. He left something stronger, a blueprint, a question, a door, cracked open, just enough for others to walk through. They tried to silence his name with contracts and concrete, but now it's whispered in classrooms, etched into murals, and stamped on bricks carried in the hands of kids who look just like he once did. Unseen, unheard, underestimated. They told him he didn't belong, so he taught them what belonging really means. Not approval, but presence. Not permission, but purpose. The hoodie, it's not a costume. It's not a phase. It's not a threat. It's armor. It's memory. It's a story that walks quietly, but with power. He didn't need to stay because the lessons stayed for him. And now, the story walks on. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt erased, overlooked, unheard, know this: you are not alone. Your voice matters, and your brick belongs. We don't just tell stories here, we lay foundation for change. Subscribe to Silent Power Stories, where every hoodie, every voice, every Black story is seen, heard, and honored. Like the video if you believe legacies can't be stolen when they're carried forward. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their power. Drop a comment and tell us, what brick are you laying? Your words matter.